my friend. Do you remember about 3 years ago, there was really just one super off-road capable heavy-duty truck from the factory?
Yeah, it was about 3 years ago, and
Maybe,
that was
is that really 3 years ago, or maybe
it was
like
a
four?
I think it was closer to 4 years ago, and
Okay.
that was the Ram Power Wagon.
Yes, but now we have a full segment of heavy-duty off-roaders, and I mean from the factory, because the Ford Super Duty arrived with the Tremor package,
Right.
And then now we have General Motors jumping in with both feet.
That's right. Now, you may be saying right now, hey, wait a minute, there were off-road capable heavy-duty pickup trucks before, and you'd be absolutely right. But what we're talking about is a step above that. If you look at the Power Wagon and just use that as the ruler, as the benchmark, then you're talking about a vehicle that has front and rear lockers. It has, I believe, 410s front and rear. It is pretty
Beefy.
powerful. It's beefy. It has an off-road suspension, really, fairly beefy tires, and its capability is way above what a regular 4x4 heavy-duty truck would be. So I think they sort of established that market, and they held it on their own for years and years. And then Ford came along.
Yes, and of course, we're not talking about the history, like you said.
Yeah.
On this episode of TFL Talking Trucks podcast, we're talking about the most modern ones.
That's
we're
right.
not going to be talking about Ford Highboys.
Nope.
We're not going to be talking about Second World War and how Power Wagon helped.
Hey, what about that Kaiser? That was pretty good.
Yeah,
we're not going to go there.
This is not a show about those.
No, we're not gonna go there.
Unfortunately. But fortunately, we have all the numbers now, pretty much everything, all the specs on the latest trucks. So let's focus a little bit more on the Chevrolet Silverado Heavy Duty
Because that's the newest player.
ZR2 and also the Sierra AT4X Heavy Duty.
Okay.
Gosh, those are long names, dude.
They are, but hey, maybe before we get really deep into this, should we talk to our Patreons or at least acknowledge them?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. You guys continue to support us in a huge way. Patreon.com/TFLcar is our only page for TFL Studios. I believe we didn't talk about this one. Just recently, we had Keith and Thomas Benefield support us on Patreon.com. So thank you guys.
Really appreciate it. Without your support, we cannot do what we are doing right now.
Yes. So that's huge. And we also have, if we have a couple more comments or questions, we'll go over that in this show.
Yes, gotcha.
So I was actually in Las Vegas when General Motors was very kind, and they actually had a pre-production early build of the Silverado Heavy Duty ZR2 Bison. So the Bison, they're teamed up with AEV, American Expedition Vehicles, and they used to have just one mid-size Bison,
Right, which is the Colorado.
and now they have three Bisons. It's a whole stampede.
Well, you'd still call that bison plural.
Bisons?
We could just call them Tatanka.
Tatanka. And by the way, we're in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm my alma mater is the Colorado Buffaloes.
That's right. My daughter's too, which is weird, but whatever. So, yes, what General Motors decided to do is they took it up a notch from just building a heavy-duty off-road capable vehicle, and they went to the premier outfitter. And I'm not saying that because they're paying us, because they're not. AEV is one of the top providers of armor and components for off-roading, and they're used throughout the industry. But what's interesting here is that General Motors had a little bit of a contract with them with the Colorado, and now that has expanded. And as such, they've made their trucks burlier, but not necessarily better in certain ways, and we'll go over that in a second.
And by the way, we haven't driven the new Silverado heavy-duty Bison.
Not the Bison, no.
Or the AT4X.
Right.
Sierra heavy-duty. And AV edition of that truck. But we can go over the specs because I want to see how they compare.
Yes.
So which is quite important.
And while we're doing that, we should also mention there is an elephant in the room. You may be wondering about Ford. And Ford indeed is right there with them. As a matter of fact, Ford came back with an answer that nobody was expecting. This is before these AEV vehicles that we're talking about.
Oh, yes.
And when they introduced the Tremor, they gave you two engine options, which is something Ram wasn't doing. You could get a diesel, and you can also get a 7.3-liter gas engine, which is what we did when we kind of built our own version of a Tremor.
Yeah, totally. And I think Ford had Ram in its sights
Without a doubt.
when the Tremor came out.
Yeah.
And it became a hugely popular truck for their heavy duty lineup.
Agreed.
And I don't know if it's because we live in Colorado, but I see Tremor Super Duties everywhere
I see an awful lot of them, yeah.
on every corner.
Well, this is properly truck country.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about tires a little bit because the Ram Power Wagon has had the Wrangler Duratrack Goodyear for several years. But one of our complaints, and I think you would agree with me, is the tire was a little bit too small and still
In
is.
every dimension, yes.
It's a 33, basically, they call it, but it's a 285/70 R17. And it's about 11.2 inches wide.
Yep.
It's okay.
No.
No?
No. It needs to be over a foot wide, and it needs to be like a 35 or a 37. Sorry. it just
Ram, are you listening, Ram?
they know exactly what my problems are with them. I mean, I would believe me. We go
But
back.
you coined the term Power Wagon don't care.
It doesn't care because it is so bloody capable. Having the ability to have a solid front axle that is really good at articulation because you can disconnect the sway bar.
Yes.
Means that even though that tire is woefully too small, it still grabs and goes, and you can bash the crap out of it. It can take it. So that's why I said it, and I still maintain that. However,
And it has skid plates, too, to
it does.
support
There's
that.
armor underneath.
Yeah.
And the Power Wagon, what's interesting is that you can get a full-blown Power Wagon, or you can opt for more of a work truck and save a lot of dough and get a lot of the Power Wagon components with it without all the glitz and everything else. And yes, you will save a lot of money.
Yeah, it's basically a Ram 2500 Tradesman, which is a crew cab 4x4 with a Power Wagon package.
Yep.
And I think, at least last year, the Power Wagon package was around 8,000. Maybe now it's a little bit more. But you're right. Actually, government buys a lot of those trucks for like Border Patrol and Forest Service.
Forest Service.
Yeah.
So I actually talked to a Forest Service guy, and he said that they are over the moon with the Ram. They find it one of the most reliable trucks that they've ever had for the Forest Service. This is coming directly from one of the guys who had no reason to back them because the Forest Service also buys from Ford.
Yeah.
So they were really leaning heavily towards Ram, but he could be a Ram fan. Who knows?
So then, of course, the Super Duty Tremor came. So and they stepped up the tire game.
Yes, they did.
They said, okay, we'll see your 33s and we'll raise you a 35.
Which is better, but I still think a little too small.
So basically, the dimension on the Ford tire is 285/75 R18, measures almost 35 inches, but still a little bit narrow, 11.2 inches.
Yeah, but it's basically the same tire as the Power Wagon, isn't it?
Well, it's almost 2 inches taller.
No, I mean in terms of the brand.
Oh, yeah, it's a Duratrack.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So the tread design and everything else is pretty much the same,
Yeah.
but its physical dimensions are different.
And then, of course, Ford also has a solid front axle and, of course, solid rear axle. But they also went, like you said, with an F250, F350 lineup. So they're offering that package on a variety of different configurations.
That's correct.
Because they also wanted to offer a lot of towing and payload capability.
Which is something they've also outdone Ram on. I would say that Ram is not sort of, I think that they're lagging in the towing and hauling category because of their suspension setup. And frankly, Ford saw that and said, okay, we can make a truck that tows a little bit more and hauls a little bit more.
Yeah, and we'll talk about powertrains in a second. But let's go over quickly the towing number on the Power Wagon, which has been a complaint of many owners for a while.
Yes, it has. Yeah.
The Power Wagon is rated to tow up to 10,520 pounds. So that's basically a half-ton territory.
That's a beefy half-ton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you get that Tradesman Power Wagon package, the base truck, you get just under 3,000 pounds of payload. But if you get a more fancy Power Wagon, the payload goes down significantly.
It does, and a lot of that has to do with the components of the interior and other stuff that you've got on the trucks. Yeah.
So people wanted a little bit more towing, and Ford gave it to them when they came out with their truck, 3 to 4 years ago. Ford tow rating right now for 2023, which is the next generation of the Tremor, is 18,200 pounds.
That is absolutely out of totally in a different realm. Than Ram.
Yeah, you could tow a larger RV behind you, a larger trailer, maybe even for work, you can tow more.
That is correct.
And about 3,500 of payload. So payload is still pretty good, but they're offering 2 engines.
Yeah.
Still, even for 2023 model year. It's the Godzilla, the 7.3 liter V8 versus the 6.4 Hemi in the Power Wagon. And then now their high output Power Stroke.
And that's where the big difference truly is, because that Power Stroke is ridiculous in terms of. In fact, didn't the 7.3 gas engine recently get a little bit of an update too?
Yeah. So for 2023, like we were just saying, it's an updated truck. They're calling it all new. We haven't driven many of them yet. I drove one version of this new Super Duty so far. They upped the torque on the Godzilla engine to 485 pound-feet of torque.
Which is more than the competition on both ends.
Yeah, it's more than the GM gas engine, and it's really more than the 6.4 from Ram.
That's correct.
And then the numbers on the high-output Power Stroke diesel in Ford are just out of this league. 500 horsepower and 1,200 pound-feet of 1,200.
1,200 foot-pounds of torque.
Yes.
Damn.
And they're not offering their standard diesel in the Tremor package.
Yeah.
Which also has a lot of torque and a lot of power. So it looks like Ford is going with this two-prong approach still on the powertrains, on the Tremor, giving you either a very expensive option, because this engine is not cheap.
No, it's not.
It's about $12,000 option to get this high-output diesel.
Right.
But when you do, you check all the boxes, the truck becomes $95,000 plus.
Yeah, I think
which is in another realm also.
What we'll touch on the pricing and how that all compares a little bit later too, because there's an awful lot going on with that. But what about the General Motors setup? Because that's in an interesting zone itself. It kind of goes between underneath the Ram and then over the Ram in certain ways. So let's talk about that powertrain.
Yeah, so for 2024 model year, which is starting up right now, they're already on sale.
Right.
They're offering two engines. And also with these off-road packages.
Right.
They're both 6.6 liter displacements, so it's a little confusing talking about this.
That is, yeah.
So their gas engine is 401 horsepower and 464 pound-feet of torque. And now made it to a 10-speed Allison branded transmission. So we know, please don't write more comments about people want us to test a new 10-speed with a gas engine.
Right.
We have asked many times.
We're begging them.
So not quite begging.
I'm begging you, General Motors, please.
It's coming soon.
Okay.
So you will see that engine on our towing tests and our off-road tests just in a couple of weeks.
Gotcha.
Hopefully a few weeks. And then they have an updated Duramax too. Their V8 diesel,
which is also 6.6 liter.
Yeah, it's 470 horsepower and 975 pound-feet of torque, which is also with a 10-speed. By the way, Ford engines are 10-speed, made it to 10 speeds on the Ford side.
And the Ram is an 8-speed.
And 8-speed ZF, which is actually a good transmission.
It's been a very solid transmission, but it also is, I think, a little bit on the older side compared to the other transmissions. Am I correct?
It is a little bit, but I hold ZF transmissions in high regard.
I know you do.
Also, Allison branded transmissions I hold in high regard, because Allison has a long history of transmissions. And of course, Ford is doing their own design on their 10-speed.
It's in-house, isn't it?
It's in-house built and designed transmission. And it's beefy, of course. It's not the same as an F-150 transmission.
No.
It's a lot more beefy. So those are the power options. And GM also went with a high tow number, 18,500 pounds.
That is higher than Ford's.
Yeah, I think they were looking at each other, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if Ford will update their ratings soon. They might. But we're talking about the same realm. And payload on the GM trucks is also between about 3,300 and 3,400 pounds.
Gotcha.
On their off-road packages.
So there's really two different games right now. There's the old and reliable Ram, which comes with one engine, one transmission option. And then you have both General Motors and Ford, and they are essentially new, or they've recently been updated, and they have two different powertrain options. And both of them outperform the Ram in terms of towing and payload.
Yes. But there's more.
There is more.
Because Ram, of course, was looking at this, and they said, well, how about we do a heavy-duty Rebel truck? So we need to also bring this in here. Because they wanted to combine also diesel availability, their Cummins, with the off-road ability, and also payload and towing.
Now, this is interesting because this is something that you and I got a chance to see firsthand at the Texas State Fair, and that's where they did the official unveil of it. And Andre got a chance to do a really good walk around interview with the head honcho.
Yeah, that was Mike Koval. Yeah.
And during that interview, we learned an awful lot. For one thing, don't think of this as a power wagon with a diesel, because it's not. It's actually something a little bit different, because there's different components in the vehicle in order to allow for it to be a diesel. One of the reasons, and this is what Ram has said repeatedly, one of the reasons why they don't put the diesel in the Ram is because packaging and cooling.
Yeah, and they've said it for decades, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, we've kept asking.
For a long time.
So what they told us before is that the straight six diesel, right? It's the 6.7 liter Cummins.
Yeah.
The engine is tall, and it's also pretty longish. And because they offer a standard Power Wagon winch on the Power Wagon, and because they want more articulation in the front axle, they haven't been able to package the diesel engine with the Power Wagon suspension.
That's exactly what they said.
Well, but how did Ford do this? And how did... Am I spitting on you? I'm
No,
sorry.
no. I have an eyelash in my eye.
I'm getting...
Unless you somehow shot an eyelash in my eye, everything's fine. Sorry. No. So what they did to fix this problem was they offered a different truck, and that is the Ram Rebel Heavy Duty.
Yes. And so it's think of the Ram Rebel Heavy Duty as their standard heavy duty 4x4, but it's, with a few upgrades, basically.
That's right.
Of course, off-road capable tires. By the way, I had a chance to drive it on the first drive in California, where Ram had this event. And they took us on a pretty gnarly trail, and it did it. The Ram Heavy Duty Rebel is still quite capable. It's not going to crawl around as many rocks as a Power Wagon would because of clearances, some of the clearances, but it's still super capable.
Right. Rear locker on that one?
Yes.
But it's not a front locker. Right.
And also, what I was hoping Ram would do, and I think they're probably working on this, I was hoping the new Ram Heavy Duty Rebel would become the current Power Wagon in capability, and the new Power Wagon would just crush everybody with bigger tires and just
more power, perhaps, or something.
More power or some other quality.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I know what you mean.
But that hasn't happened yet.
And it hasn't happened.
No.
Exactly.
But the Heavy Duty Rebel the gas version of it was able to tow up to 16,870 pounds, almost 17,000. And the diesel HD Rebel will tow up to about 15,000 pounds. And the payload ranges between about 2,000 pounds for the diesel version of the Rebel to about 3,100 pounds for the gas version.
Okay, now this is math that I'm not really accustomed to, because I'm looking at numbers that show that the gas engine is going to be able to tow more than the diesel?
That is what this is saying. And I think, what the reason is?
Weight?
It's the weight of the truck.
Okay.
Yeah. Because Ford and General Motors have been playing this interesting game. You know how 3/4 ton truck, 2,500, there used to be a kind of a agreed on limit on gross vehicle weight.
Sure.
Which was 10,000 pounds and still is.
Okay.
But what GM did in 2020 when they introduced the new generation of the heavy duty trucks, they said, you know what? On a 2,500 truck, we'll raise our gross vehicle weight rating to 11,000 or maybe even higher, maybe 11,300 for some versions.
Okay.
And that will give us a lot more payload, actually, because you're increasing your gross vehicle weight.
That's true.
And also potentially gross combined weight could increase as well for towing. But Ram kind of has stuck to their guns, and they kept it capped at 10,000 pounds for their 2,500 series trucks.
Gotcha.
So I think that's kind of preventing them from adding more payload to their heavy-duty Rebel, and also preventing them also maybe from tuning it to tow more.
Okay.
Which is kind of odd.
It is kind of odd. I have a feeling they're going to do an about face, especially as time goes on and these trucks are, at least on paper, outperforming them. Because it is about paper for a lot of consumers out there, right? I mean, you're looking at what your vehicle can tow or how much torque it has, and then suddenly it's like, well, wait a minute, I have more than you. And that actually matters to an awful lot of people out there, and I have a feeling that Ram's going to eventually look at that and go, we're going to have to make some changes.
So then let's talk a little bit more about suspension on the GM trucks, right? So what is the reason why somebody would buy a heavy-duty off-road truck? Why don't they buy something mid-size?
Or half-ton.
Yeah. I think it's really about capability for towing and payload.
That really is what it comes down to. Because otherwise it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, you're buying a much larger vehicle
Much more expensive
a
vehicle.
lot more expensive, and it's a heavier vehicle, meaning that already compromises it a little bit off-road. And, frankly speaking, these are difficult vehicles to pilot around obstacles and whatnot. So you have to have a trade-off, and usually that has to do with somebody saying, okay, I want to be able to tow a lot more or haul a lot more.
Yeah, so I visited with one of the engineers on the Chevy performance side of off-roading, Tim Demetrio. He showed me around the Bison Silverado heavy-duty truck, and they gave it a 1.5-inch lift over the standard, as if the standard truck wasn't tall enough.
Do they level it, or they actually give the whole thing a lift?
I asked about this, and the whole thing was lifted.
No kidding.
It's not a leveling kit. And they used some of the customized front suspension components to give the front a lift, and the rear is kind of a puck. So there's basically a spacer in the back for the leaf spring.
Gotcha.
And they still stayed with the leaf spring.
Okay.
So Ram is using coils.
That's right.
And that's kind of why they don't have a lot of payload or towing, because their suspension is softer.
It is a lot softer.
I don't know how this will ride. We haven't driven this yet.
Well, if this is a ZR2, then does it have spool valve?
Yes.
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 Oh, the new shocks. Actually, Andre and I are huge fans of this shock absorber. This is not your regular, bypass simple setup. This is a proper multitasking shock absorber, and it is something that they're using on their midsize, full-size, and now heavy-duty trucks.
Yeah, and immediately I came up to Tim. I'm like, so did you include the diameter of this shock? He's like, no.
What?
And I was like, what? And they're like, the shocks are super capable. They're changing, of course, the valving and some of the tuning inside the shock, but the body is still, I think it's about 40 millimeters diameter, which is what, like 2.5-ish inch diameter for the shock.
Not very big for a heavy-duty truck.
And this truck could weigh over 8,000 pounds with a diesel.
And they're completely confident that this.
Yes.
So explain how the spool valve works. I mean, it's fascinating tech.
Yeah, it's spring-loaded valve. So instead of in a standard shock, Fox does this and Bill Stein.
Right.
They use shims because the fluid inside the shock, as it passes through, you could stack little washers or shims, and you could also have bypasses, like you said, to kind of control the damping force, right?
Right.
And then those shims vary in size and thickness, so you can tune them and you can stack them.
Right.
Well, the way a spool valve multimatic shock works, you control it with a spring. And the spring, and this is multimatic speaking because I talked to those engineers.
Right.
You know exactly how spring would behave, right? Because there's science around it. So you can tune that shock according to multimatic engineers a little bit more precisely, rather than stacking shims.
And there's more. You are not adjusting it yourself. It
Right.
adjusts itself. Now,
It's not like a Raptor.
Exactly. Whereas the Raptor, you can click around and you can adjust it. This one pretty much figures out what's going on its own. And from our experience, it's worked a treat.
Yeah, and it combines on-road kind of, I would call it precision. Because usually when you get on an off-road truck, and I like this too, like a Raptor or a TRX, they feel a little bit like trophy truck. It leans and it has that kind of
suspension's
softer,
got a little bit more of a dip to it.
Yeah, it has some give, and it feels okay. It feels good because you're in the big truck.
Right.
But the way DSSVs feel at least in the 1500 trucks and the Colorado trucks that we've driven, they're a little bit more precise. There's not as much of wallowing, and then of course off-road, they change their behavior, right? Because the speed changes and everything else.
Yeah, and so it's a completely different science. Now, earlier with the first-gen Colorado with that suspension, there were some issues in terms of where the shock was actually located because it was low, and the way it's shaped, it actually would catch on things. This is according to certain people. I never experienced this, but looking at it, you can definitely see that. So they've actually changed the location of where these things would go, so they're more up and out of the way, so to speak.
Yeah, it's basically mounting the shocks inside of the frame rails or versus outside of the frame rails.
Right.
And it has to do with packaging because, of course, the tire is there, the leaf springs may be in the way, right? So General Motors is playing around with this. On a new Colorado ZR2 that we've driven recently, they put the shocks outboard of the frame, and tuck them close to the tires, which everybody prefers.
Yep.
Ford did this with the new Ranger across the board, actually.
Yeah.
But on this truck, they're still kind of hanging down. So there could be some clearance problem because on the new GM heavy-duty off-road trucks, the shock is still inboard of that frame.
Gotcha. So the suspension system, I think Andre and I both agree, is kind of a fire and forget type system. It's simple to use. There's nothing to it really. But of course, the question is that some of you guys do prefer, having the ability to tune your shocks as you go. So that's not what this does.
Right, and there's no valves you can reach underneath, and
Nothing like that.
Or any buttons to push.
Right.
For that. The new GM trucks do have a rear locker, but not a front locker. So Ram Power Wagon is still, true, front and rear locker.
Front and rear
disconnecting anti-sway bar. We have to mention this.
Yes.
Because Power Wagon does offer that.
Which allows for better articulation up front, and which is the whole point of it. And the only other vehicle off the top of my head that really does that is Jeep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there have been issues with the actual unit, the disconnecting, because it's you hit a button and it'll actually do it.
Now Bronco does that too.
Oh, Bronco does this?
Yeah.
You're right. That's right.
And the Bronco unit works a little bit more smoothly.
That's what I hear.
Yeah.
I've never actually used it, even though I've driven several Broncos, but I don't think it's in any of the Ford pickups, as far as I know.
Because a lot of the Ford pickups, other than the Super Duty, have independent front suspensions, right? And it just works a little bit
differently. And then the
differently.
Super Duty, the Tremor does not have a disconnecting front sway bar, as far as I know.
Right.
Now, the General Motors, this is the only one amongst the three that has an independent front suspension.
Yeah, and you're probably typing already into the comments section. It has independent suspension. That means it sucks. Well, we'll have to drive it and find out.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of controversy. So I did this video on the new ZR2 Bison. And by the way, the Bison parts, we'll go over the bumpers in a second.
That's
If you turn the tire, there are some bump stops in the front of the new GM heavy-duty off-road trucks. And they looked like they were almost, with the truck standing still, they're almost contacting the rear control arm.
Okay.
So people started writing us questions. You guys said, that means there is no travel. If the bump stop is already attached, connecting to the rear arm, how is it going to articulate?
Right, without just slamming into that thing.
Right. So Tim and team answered. So I just want to reiterate that answer. They basically said, well, think about like a pendulum effect, right? The bump stop is actually closer to where it hinges, right? So the travel there is very, very small. On the end, by the wheel, there's a lot of travel, right? Because it hinges right here.
The cantilever.
So it still we'll have to test its articulation, of course.
Oh, we're definitely going to test its articulation.
But don't worry, it still has travel.
Yeah.
Even though it looks like it may not have travel.
Yeah, between that and the lift, I have a feeling that it's going to exceed our expectations. That's just a guess. They know what they have to compete against. And also remember that the benefits, and it's a really simple thing to measure. Like, let's look at the Ford Bronco versus the Jeep Wrangler, independent front suspension versus solid axle. Off-road, I still think that the solid axle might be a better choice for people who are really serious about going over boulders. However, 99% of what people are doing with those vehicles, a lot of it's on the road, and the independent front suspension offers a better ride and usually better contact altogether on the highway and a smoother ride. And I stand by that. So if General Motors managed to find a way to do good articulation in a heavy-duty truck with an independent front suspension, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I would agree. And of course, GM fans would say, well, General Motors has used an independent front torsion suspension for decades.
Yes, I have.
My 2002 Silverado heavy duty 2500 had a similar design with torsion,
which is probably
bars.
the best part of that truck.
But it makes it comfier.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's the best part of that truck.
Yeah. So there's a trade, right? Because what do you want in an off-road truck? You want the tire to always have contact with the ground.
Precisely.
Right. Yes, independent front suspensions are limited in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have the new trucks have brake distribution and traction control systems that start braking the wheels that spin,
just like the midsize and half tons.
So there are other ways to control this.
Right.
But you might be wondering also, What are the differences between the AEV editions of these new General Motors trucks versus the standard ones?
Right. And there are some differences that we need to note.
Yeah, and usually when you talk about a Bison truck or an AEV edition for the GMC lineup, you're talking about really the underbody protection and bumpers, and also winches.
Winches.
Yes, because Ford Super Duty Tremor finally offers a winch. I mean, it wasn't available
As
in
an
the first
option.
year.
As
Yeah,
an option,
it's an
yeah.
option. Power Wagon has had a winch since
Standard,
birth,
which is
almost.
standard, yeah.
And now General Motors says, okay, if you do want a winch, don't buy the standard ZR2 or the standard AT4X. Step up to the AEV editions of those trucks. And with that comes big bumpers.
Right.
Steel bumpers.
Which look really good. I'm sure they're incredibly functional. I've said it before, AEV builds really good equipment. However, there are some things that you need to keep in mind in terms of what you might lose. So one of the things that Chevy did in the early days with their ZR2 version of the Colorado first gen was they did a cutout of their front bumper, allowing your front tires to meet the rock quicker. Now, it wasn't your entire approach angle improved, but it was the approach angle of your tire, so you could put it onto that rock or that obstacle that much easier without it being slammed into the bottom of the truck or the front of the truck.
Yes.
And that was one of the cool things about their bumpers, and that is what they've done throughout the ZR2 lineup. However, if you get the AEV version, if I could speak, the AEV version of the bumper
Or the Bison. Yeah.
you are suddenly losing that. There's still a cutout to a degree. It comes up, but it's not quite as aggressive as the setup is on the regular ZR2. And for some of you out there, that actually might matter.
And also, a couple other things happen when you do this, when you step up to the Bison or the AEV. First of all, the bumper is heavier.
Yes.
It's larger, right?
It's really beefy.
But it's meant for, it's okay if you come in contact with maybe a rock face or some other obstacle, and this bumper won't easily dent. I mean, it's really strong, but it does weigh a lot. So that's one item. And we actually recently put an AEV bumper on a Ram project truck.
That's right. And that changed an awful lot. And on top of that, we put a winch up there as well.
Yes.
So between the two things, hundreds of pounds of extra weight on top of next to what the original bumper weighed. But we gained a lot of functionality. However, once again, you do lose a few things. So in our case, this bumper is great for everything, but the approach angle is suddenly diminished slightly because the winch is up there and the whole mount and everything. So that takes away a little bit of your approach angle, but it's really not that bad. Another thing, if I can go into it, is the rear bumpers. Once again, AEV makes super, super beefy rear bumpers.
They do.
And they are great for utility with one exception. So one of the things that General Motors pioneered, they were one of the early adopters of this, was a bumper where you could use it also as a step. It had a little carved area where you could put your foot in there and step into the rear of the truck. And I really liked that. It was like 3 or 4 inches lower than stepping on the very top of the bumper. And they have that pretty much throughout all their GM trucks, pickup trucks.
Except
If you get the AEV bumper, and I think it's because of strength, they actually cover that spot, so you cannot use it. Thus, you're losing that. So that's the negative. So I'm pretty sure that the positives, if you're serious about off-roading, you can do without some of these things, perhaps. But the other side of it is, if you're going to really use your vehicle as a utility vehicle and you have to crawl back there from time to time, having those cutouts is kind of important. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, totally. Of course, General Motors also has the multi-folding tailgate. So if that works for you, let's say you're not towing, you can unfold the tailgate into a step and use that to climb inside.
But some people don't want to open their tailgate for various reasons, and they just want to hop it.
Or if there's a trailer there, for example.
Right, exactly.
So those are the trade-offs. Although the AEV bumpers have a lot of features, there are cutouts for lights. There's also cutouts for factory park sensors, right? So you're not losing any features. Really.
No,
I mean technology features.
None of those are going away.
And also really heavy-duty recovery points.
Right, front and rear.
So that's really good. Also, you're gaining underbody protection for a lot of the AEV trucks.
And that, to me, is the big selling point, more so than the bumpers. because they are covering the parts of the truck you really want covered.
Yeah, and actually, this video hasn't published yet, but I recently we had a Chevy Silverado 1500 ZR2 Bison. Remember, we did a podcast about this.
Yes, we did.
I actually took it to the Ironclads Off-Road Trail. This was just a couple days ago. And I was impressed, first of all, I can't talk about the entire video, otherwise you won't watch it. But I never scraped. Actually, I did scrape, and when I did scrape my underbody skid plate, I was not scared because I knew that was so tough that it would not damage the truck.
Is that part made out of boron?
That was boron.
Yeah, they use
Boron steel.
boron steel.
By the way, you know what? There is no boron on a heavy-duty truck. I asked about this.
Okay.
It is steel bash plates, skid plates underneath, but also they don't have a fuel tank skid plate.
Really?
Because partially they were worried about weight, and there were other considerations. So boron still makes the skid plates a little bit thinner, a little bit more lightweight. But for the heavy-duty truck, maybe because of production constraints or other considerations, these have standard steel plates.
Right. Okay. I'm a little disappointed about not having protection under the gas tank.
Yeah.
Honestly. But I'm sure there's some technical reason for that.
And by the way, you could add your own.
Sure.
So,
well, obviously.
But that's the whole point of the truck.
Right.
You're buying a turnkey solution to a truck to end all trucks.
Right. And suddenly not being able to completely protect it right out of the factory when other ones will, that's a little bit of an issue.
Yeah. But this truck, will go into a hurricane destroyed area. It will help people. That's kind of the character of this truck, right?
Right. Gotcha.
So that's what you're gaining with the Bison. And it also costs money. By the way, we don't have the final pricing on the new heavy-duty Bison or AV.
It's going to be expensive.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the diesel versions would be pushing $100K.
Yeah. God.
Remember, the light-duty Bison was $84,700.
Yep, that's right.
With
We had
options.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're adding size, you're adding a diesel engine.
Right.
That will increase the price probably to $100K.
Yeah, or in that realm. I'm sure it will. So let's take a little bit of a break from this. We'll come back to it, but I think we should talk about a question that came up recently from one of our Patreons.
This is Dan. Dan's been supporting us for 10 months. He's been a solid supporter.
Thank you, Dan. We appreciate it.
Yeah, so Dan actually does not have a heavy-duty question. He has a mid-size question.
Okay.
So he says, I just read out your post about some of the teasers on the new Tacoma. He's talking about the 2024 model. And he says, what do you guys think? Because the rest of the segment seems to be paring down to only the crew cab with a short bed, while the Tacoma is still going to offer, because they teased those cab sizes.
Yes, they did.
It's still going to offer a couple different cabs and couple different bed lengths.
That's right.
What do we think?
I think that Toyota is really smart by doing that, and I think that General Motors may have put themselves in a little bit of a corner by not offering that. I know they're saying, look, if you want a longer bed, just get a bigger truck.
That's what Ford is now saying too.
Right.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm scratching my head. Actually, so does Jeep. That's what they do with their Gladiator.
Yeah, Jeep only has one configuration.
Yeah, that's it, one configuration. So, yeah, a lot of people are paring down. I think that Toyota is very smart by doing this. And remember, there's something very important to gauge everything that Toyota is doing right now. And I know I sound like a Toyota fanboy, but as you guys know, I have preferences going in all directions. Toyota has been in this game for a long time. They have led the segment with midsize trucks forever, and they know what they're doing. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt on this one and say, look, they're smart. And they figured that there's more configurations, meaning more people are going to be interested in their trucks because there's more selection.
Yeah, and they also sell a lot. So last year, they sold about 220,000 Tacomas in the United States alone.
And that wasn't even their best year.
No. Because of COVID and other reasons, that was a little constrained.
Right.
And then around the world, the Hilux is one of the best-selling vehicles, period. I mean, there's only like the RAV4, I think, outsells it, or maybe the Civic. The Hilux is the cousin to the Tacoma.
It is a cousin to the Tacoma, and it's been around for years and years. In fact, The U.S. had the Hilux just for a little tiny bit of time, and the Hilux it's actually a different platform, I believe, too. But we don't know what's going to happen when
I
the
think
Toyota
they're
changes.
emerging a
Are
little
they
bit
emerging?
because when I was talking to Mike Swears, the chief engineer for their trucks, he was also mentioning to me that eventually the idea is that the multi-link coil rear suspension will transition to the high globally, right? It will be accepted globally,
which makes sense.
So
yeah,
so they might be merging in some of their chassis and platforms.
and that's a TNGA-F platform?
Exactly.
Right. So we're probably going to see a lot more. And that's actually good for the consumer because the more they can share, the lower their prices could be, technically speaking.
So this is what I see. I see the new Tacoma coming, right, later this year.
Right.
With many configurations, also a hybrid that Toyota has teased already, announced. And then General Motors and Ford may adjust their strategies. That's what I can see.
I would agree
So
with you.
if the Tacoma is still really, really successful and GM and Ford are not making inroads into sales, GM and Ford can adjust their strategies, I think.
They can. And also remember that Toyota will be offering a manual transmission.
And Ford decided not to.
Which is strange. A lot of you guys out there were sending us emails and text and whatnot saying, hey, the 7-speed that's inside the Bronco, it would fit right inside the Ranger. It seems logical that Ford would do that because there is a little bit of a demand. And I agree with you guys, but Ford apparently didn't see it that way. And that kind of makes sense to a certain degree, I suppose, because Ford is already offering 3 different engines. So maybe they were like, yeah, that's just one step too much. But who knows what they'll do in the future. And we still are anticipating that Ford may have some sort of hybrid up their sleeves in the next couple of years as well. With that being said, Toyota will offer, as far as we know, a hybrid powertrain and then a separate powertrain that will work with the manual transmission. This is what we're expecting. Nothing's been announced specifically about that, but this is logical.
And we'll learn about it, of course,
really soon.
Very, very soon.
Yeah.
So, and also Dan is asking, will there be more affordable mid-sized trucks because everything is getting more expensive? You're absolutely right, Dan. Things are getting more expensive.
Yeah.
The Ranger now starts at about $34,000.
Yeah. What's the Chevy start at? 32?
31-ish.
Right.
So Ford went way beyond even where the Chevy is. But the other expensive
Nissan
truck...
is the most affordable one right now. The configuration...
It might be.
Yeah.
It might be because Chevy's no longer offering the smaller cab.
Right.
So the Nissan might be actually the most affordable.
With the King Cab, I believe, if you get the King Cab two-wheel drive, you can go under 30. I was configuring one when I was looking at my little pickup, and it looked like a possibility, but it didn't work out.
The other truck that's getting more expensive is the Gladiator.
Yes.
The base one.
It's like 42 for base or something, 43?
Remember, 2 years ago we had this podcast.
It was in the 30s.
It was like 33 or 34.
And that was the one, once again, I was considering. And damn you all for your silly price increases. But so I think the answer to that question is there is a yes. There are still inexpensive ones, but they're not midsize. They're the small trucks. They're the compact ones that are essentially, car-based or unibody pickups like the Santa Cruz and like the Maverick, and we're expecting other ones to come in the near future. And those can be had for the $20,000 zone, say around from 24, I think is a good midpoint, maybe 25, realistically. And unfortunately, they're making as many as they can, but I don't think you can even buy a Ford Maverick right now with the base model. I don't think you can.
They've been hard to find still.
Yeah.
And they sold like 90,000 of them last year.
Right. And the least expensive version of the Santa Cruz is around 25, 26. So they're still out there and they're still affordable, but you're losing a lot of capability buying these smaller ones. So that's something to keep in mind.
And I think we can end the podcast on this note, the price, right? So we mentioned this already. We talked about how capable the Tremor is, Super Duty. We talked about how capable the new GM trucks appear to be with payload and towing and their suspension systems. But they're boosting prices because those new features cost a lot of money.
Exactly. So
maybe that's the Power Wagon game.
Well, they're the value leader, I believe.
Yeah.
Because you can see, once again, the Tradesman Power Wagon is for the most part, the least expensive amongst these. And then, you have Ford and Chevy kind of duking it out. But then again, you can also get diesel versions of the Ford and Chevy, which are a lot more expensive. And at the end of the day, spending, say, and we're going to have an exact price in about 10 seconds here, but spending a lot less and getting really good off-road capability, but losing out on towing and hauling capacity, that's a big question for a lot of you guys. Now, here's my point about the Power Wagon and why I would still buy a Power Wagon, aside from the fact that you all know that I'm biased. It's the character of the truck is a little bit different than the character of both the Chevrolet, the GMC, and of course the Ford. There's something about the layout and the looks and the driving of the big Ram that makes me like it. Now, the first thing I would do is somehow, after I lost all my money buying the truck, is I would sell part of the house and try to buy new tires for it, because many of you guys who are heavy-duty Ram fans out there agree that 35s or 37s would be much better on a truck like this, and I would agree with you. However, my other point is if you buy the tradesman version of the, what we're talking about, like $64,000?
I just did this.
With the Power Wagon?
I found it, Nathan.
Uh-huh.
So I went to Ram website to the 2023 Ram heavy duty configurator because I wanted to see it for myself. The Power Wagon package on the Tradesman's is still $7,995. We mentioned $8,000.
Yep.
It comes with everything we mentioned. The disconnecting sway bar, the suspension, the wheels, the tires, the winch, all those things. And the final sticker price is, drumroll, $61,310.
Now,
with a gas engine.
With a gas engine, and that's all you get.
Of course, yes.
Yes, but bottom line, that is way less than what Ford and General Motors are offering. By a huge margin.
We just talked about the light-duty Chevy Bison at $84,000.
Exactly.
So that's the game.
But once again, I'm the value guy. I always go for the cheapest thing I can possibly get. I try to save the money. So that's one of the reasons why I would get that Power Wagon. If you're going up to the Chevrolet, GMC, and the Ford, you're spending a lot more money. Am I correct?
Yeah, and we don't know exact pricing, like we said. We will find out that shortly on the heavy-duty trucks from those guys. Let me paint it in red. So I'm still configuring
Andre's playing with the configurator, and he's actually found red for free.
Red was free.
Yeah.
No bed liner.
Who needs a bed liner? Come on.
I was talking to Nina Barlow. She works with a lot of Jeeps and Rams.
Nina's a friend of TFL's, and she is one of the most capable off-road guides I've ever met.
Yes, and she actually owns an older version of the Power Wagon. I think hers is like 2016.
Yeah,
model.
with the old transmission in it. I think it was like a 6-speed.
It was a 6-speed.
Yeah.
And she beat the bejeebies out of this truck. She put it on 35s.
Yep.
And she actually removed one of the resonators in the back.
That's right. I remember that.
To make it more throaty.
Yeah, and it sounds dynamite.
And it's still really reliable for her.
Yeah, she hasn't had any mechanical issues with it. I think she burst a shock or something, or had to replace the shocks because of something like that, which is no surprise given what she does. But for the most part, this thing's been a tank. And it's one of the reasons why I've been kind of keeping an eye on what she's doing with it, because every once in a while she'll post it on social media. And it's like, yeah, I know what you guys are saying. Why did you buy a Santa Cruz when you could? Yeah, because it's half the price of this. That's why. I don't have money. I couldn't buy this. But I would if I could. I really would.
Yeah, totally. So maybe that is the game, and maybe that's the card that Ram is playing.
Yeah.
Because affordability card is a very important tool.
It is.
Even though the other trucks may have diesels, they may tow more, they may have bigger tires. They cost a lot more. That's the bottom line.
They do. And I'm looking forward to getting my free lime green Power Wagon with big Power Wagon written across the side of it on 37s, coming to me free from Ram, because I just gave them a ringing endorsement.
Whoa.
I'm kidding, guys. This is what, but everybody assumes, like, oh, you got paid to say that.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure.
No, I didn't get paid. It's just I really like the truck, blah, blah, blah. Actually, I really like the Tremor as well, but I thought that the ride on the Ram was a little bit better. Remember that when we were kind of testing the two of them around? Yeah, I thought the Ram's ride was a really good compromise as well, but that's a whole different story. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining us. I'm curious to which one you would pick. Now, I know we didn't have the pricing for the other ones, but that's unfortunately, we don't have any of the GM pricing available yet. But I think Andre's point of them being close to 100K, I think it's
For
pretty
diesel.
valid. For the diesel
Yeah.
is pretty valid. And we do have something here, though. You were going to bring up the
I'm
one
trying
final
to
thing.
I'm trying to build the most affordable Tremor Super Duty. They also have something new for 2023 model year. They're calling it simply the off-road package.
Okay.
So if you are budget minded, if you're looking at the Power Wagon, maybe you could select a gas-powered Super Duty crew cab off-road package, which is more affordable, but on smaller tires.
Right.
It doesn't have everything the Tremor has. But still, that's an option for you.
Yeah, that is a rear locker, though, part of that package, I believe.
I believe
right?
so, yes.
Yeah.
But it's on 33s. So once again, a little bit less capability, but more affordable.
Yeah.
So
you're looking at this Super Duty, and
4x4.
you're trying to find the most. Sorry, guys. It's Andre enjoys.
I'm trying to
This
build.
is what he does during his lunch
Well-
breaks. He goes through there, and
Or
he's,
at night, also.
Yeah. I'm sure your wife is thrilled. Get off that computer.
Also, the FX4 is still around. So
Yeah.
Ford has a lot of choices, actually.
They have the most choices, I would say, in terms of all the packaging they do and all the different packages you can get. That's for sure.
So I built a Tremor. I tried to do XLT, gas-powered, 7.3 liter, kind of the more of the basic, quiet basic truck. And whoa, 60,780.
How did you get that so cheap?
It's an XLT Tremor,
Oh, okay. Well, I take it back. The
but no winch.
No winch and also no front locker.
Right.
Yeah. So the
So
Power
still,
Wagon is
for the
still,
same price, in the low 60s.
But to be fair, Ford actually undercut that price by a little tiny bit. So I still stand by that. I'd probably get the Ram, but the Ford, considering what you're getting for the money, and I believe with certain numbers that are better, that is impressive.
So, okay, just because we're here, let me get a Lariat.
Okay.
So a little bit more fancy Ford with the Tremor package and a high output diesel.
Okay.
Just to double check ourselves,
Okay.
right? Because you're probably saying, oh, Ford is now very expensive. I mean, very affordable.
Right.
So the high output diesel is $12,495. You are getting 500 horse. You're getting all that stuff.
Yeah, you're getting superpower.
Then you go down here and you select Tremor package with a sport package discount. So it's loading up. And I'm not choosing any other options.
So that's $6,115.
Yes, on top of the diesel.
Right, gotcha.
And I'm not, no bed liner, nothing. Just a diesel Lariat 4x4 Tremor with a sport package.
Okay. So let's get to pricing on this
Drum
one.
roll, $84,245.
That's a lot more expensive.
Yeah, and we're not talking about additional accessories.
Yeah,
here
and
either.
you didn't go for a
And no
luxury
winch.
edition or anything else.
And no winch.
Right.
So, yeah, these prices can go way higher.
Right. And then some of you would argue, yeah, but the diesel is so much more capable. And you're absolutely right. I mean, towing, hauling, efficiency, all that. But, you know, at the end of the day, it really comes down to what you can actually afford and what you can really afford over the long term. I try to look at the long game. I like to have vehicles actually paid off before the warranty falls apart. And so a couple of years.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah, it's wishful thinking. So I try to, do it within the next, 2 years, 3 years at the most.
Yeah.
Because, you're paying a lot of interest and all that stuff. But on these super expensive trucks, an awful lot of people go and buy them. And, they're paying heavy
Or
payments.
7-8 year loans.
Exactly.
Even. Yeah.
These huge loans with tons and tons of interest. So, but that's a whole different story. That's a different podcast right there. So, bottom line is that they all compare in different ways. They all have their pluses and minuses. If I were someone who could build my very own special Nathan truck, it would probably have a lot of the running gear out of the Ram in terms of the axles. It would have the suspension out of the General Motors products. I love that spool.
Oh, the shocks?
Yes,
Okay.
the shocks. It would have the engine transmission out of the Ford.
So like a turducken off-roader.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if I could do it my
Yeah,
own
yeah.
dream
No,
world,
no.
wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah.
There you go. It's all solved.
How would you build your truck? Let us know.
And then I'd freak people out by taking a Nissan
Logo?
XD and no, just the body and chassis and put it on top of that. Nobody would be able to.
With a Cummins logo on top of it?
Not even that. Just
Wow.
a V8, whatever. Just freak people out. It'd be great.
That is crazy.
Yeah, wouldn't that be an awesome
Yeah,
off-roader?
that's cool.
Yeah, see?
I like it.
That's how I roll.
I like it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. And yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.